Okay, good evening. Let's call the meeting to order. Start with the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Few housekeeping matters. Emergency exits off to the side. There's some out in the back as well. Restrooms are in the lobby area. If you haven't done so already, please sign the attendance sheet out in the back. There is proposed resolutions also in the back, along with email addresses and phone numbers of the planning department. As far as the meeting progresses, if there are exhibits that you're referring to, whether it be on the screen or those that have been offered to us, do your very best to use descriptive language, compass directions, structures. It makes it hard for Amber over here that when you say, well, if you notice over here and over there, that's hard to interpret once we take a look at the minutes. So do your best. Take your time. We won't speak over you. Please don't speak over us, so we're going to have a nice, clear record. If there's new exhibits, let us know it's new. We'll mark them on a date and a letter. Keep it in the record just so we keep everything as orderly as possible. All right, first thing I'd like to do is take a look at the minutes, the August 21st, 2023 minutes. If everyone has had a chance to review, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I move.
Thank you, Fred. A second?
Second.
Thank you. That was
Leah.
Leah. Thank you, Leah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carry. Thank
One
you.
abstain.
Oh, two.
I was absent.
Yep. Matt and Alexis abstain. All right. Hellinger? Did I pronounce that right?
Ellinger.
Hellinger, okay. You have a request for a variance to place a pole barn forward of the front line of your home. Why don't you come on up, and we're probably going to ask you a few questions. And I'm going to take it. This is your first time for a variance?
Yes.
Right. And you are?
Scott Hellinger.
Thank you. The matter had to be referred to the county planning board, so we can't make a decision today.
Okay.
The way that works is we're going to start creating a record. We're going to hear your application. We may ask you a few questions. And then at a point when the county planning board reviews your application, they're going to send us some notes and things. It depends on how they treat it will depend on how we're going to vote. But we won't be able to decide on it today.
Okay.
County
Understood.
planning board,
September 13th. So then the meeting following that would be September 18th.
Okay.
okay?
Do I have to be present for that?
For the county meeting, no.
Yeah. Okay.
I
All
will
right.
forward you their
You
comments.
told me about it, I think, when I originally filled out the paperwork. Is that because it's on a county road? Okay. Yeah, I think that's what you told me.
There's, right. General municipal law requires that if it touches boundaries of whether it be a state road or other municipalities, that the county gets to weigh in on whether or not there's going to be a county impact to the local municipality is the nutshell version.
Understood.
Great. All right, tell us about your application.
So I'd like to put up a 30 by 50 pole barn to the left of my property. I don't know exactly what the setbacks are gonna be at. Obviously, they would be within whatever I'm supposed to be at. I think it's like 40 and 15 from the side, correct? So it'll be more than that. I'm gonna have upon approval, I'm gonna go ahead and have BME come out and do a grade map and all that stuff, so I can turn that into you guys. We're gonna be using it for storage I have 2 tractors, a trailer, a camper, 2 pickup trucks, and 2 hot rods.
Utilities?
It will have utilities, yes.
Electric?
Electric and gas. And I'm pretty sure I'm gonna put water in there, I'm not 100% yet. There will not be there will be no septic. So no toilet, just water, maybe a hose in there, drain.
Okay. When it comes time, it's going to be extremely helpful. You don't guess at it on where this is going. You can say it's going forward, but as close as you possibly can. If you don't have it today, that's fine. But at next meeting, if you could say it's going to be 20 feet from the sideline, or especially from the road, it's going to be 100, whatever that number is. So do your very best. All right. Fred, do you have any questions?
This is a pretty dramatic request. We've handled a number of these this summer, but they've all been big lots, forests in front of it, different situation. This is boom right there. And I'm a little concerned you're gonna run out of room with it. I kind of wish you could have came before. But as Mike said, you're gonna have to make a pretty good drawing. First-class sketch or a poor survey map, one or the other.
Yeah, it'll be,
Locate it.
yes, it will be a survey
I think
map.
it's gonna be touch and go. That's all I got to say.
All right, Matt, questions?
Yeah, so the house is there, you started construction on it? Is
The
that?
house is there. We're finishing up drywall now. We'll be putting in utilities in probably the next week. All the underground utilities will be going in. There is a garage attached to the house that is not up yet. It's just a 2-car garage. And then there's a porch going on the front.
What would it look like to put something in compliance? Like where would you put it? How big would it be?
I don't know. I mean, I would do the same size. I
I
guess
mean,
I
you may
could-
not have to. I mean, to make it, I'm saying to make it compliant, you might say, look, I gotta make it 20 feet smaller, to be able to fit within what the code allows today. I always like to get an idea of, given the site that you have and any unique characteristics to it, like what is, there's needs and wants.
Do you mean in compliance as in behind the house?
Is in, yes, behind the
Okay.
front setback of the
Okay.
house, yeah.
So the only reason, because I would love to put it behind the house, the only reason I can't put it behind the house is because there's a expansion area for the septic system. So, I mean, I'll put it behind the house as long as you guys are fine with me putting a driveway over my expansion area for my septic system to get to it.
I don't deal
I
with
don't think
septic
we'd be
systems
fine.
or expansion areas, but I'm assuming you're talking, like the leach lines you're talking?
Yeah, so my septic runs to the right side of the house and it goes, there's probably another 60 feet of expansion area before it hits my property line. That's the only reason why I didn't think I could put it behind my house, because there's,
So when you were developing the property, is this a last minute ad? Was this something you
Yeah,
didn't
it was-
know? Was it a,
we didn't know we were gonna be doing this. The idea is to be able to store, my tractors and the cars and have it all on the property and not have to go other places and have it all right there. I mean, if someone can give me an answer, I don't know who I would talk to, but if someone would, if I could get approval to put it in the back right corner of the lot, I'm not against that at all. My only concern is that expansion area right there. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with putting it on the back right.
yeah, you'd have to talk to a civil
I just
engineer or somebody
don't,
to
I just
understand
don't
that.
know, when I talked to BME, it was a no-no.
Okay.
Just because if I had to use that expansion area in the future, they're like, well, then you have a driveway there. How will you access the back if you end up having to use the expansion area? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't. There's no room to go around there. The expansion area actually almost touches the property line. If you go, I don't know if you guys have it or not, there's a print. There is it's an older print with elevations on it of my property, and the there should be the septic engineering plan on there, and it'll show you exactly what I'm talking about.
I haven't seen it. This does show what looks like a drain field off to the east end, so is the
Yes.
garage on the west?
Yeah, the
west
garage.
end of the house?
Yep.
You said it was 30 by 50?
Yes.
I guess no further questions for now. It just seems like an odd request, given that this was a complete field probably just months ago, right? And you kind of had the opportunity to play around with it a little bit. I don't see too much really within the neighborhood of, structures being forward of the front line. There's often, obviously, there's county roads, right, where you have the barns that are right up next, and they're kind of within character. I guess I'm just kind of on the fence. It'd be interesting to see kind of what it looks like when it's kind of drawn out with the right numbers. I'd still like to see something in terms of what you could or couldn't do to be in compliance. I can tell from the drawing here, obviously, if you can't drive over those leach lines, which I'm sure you probably can't, that kind of self-limits yourself to a certain degree.
Yeah. that was-
Although if it's just for storage, maybe you don't drive over it, I guess. I don't know, or very often. I don't know how you deal with that. I mean, I have property with leach lines, and I drive my truck over it sometimes when I need to get back there, but versus having a formal driveway that goes to it. But just kind of my comments right now.
Alexis?
Everything you're going to be storing in the garage, is that for personal use or any for business use?
Yep, I have I use my truck for business use, yes.
Okay.
There's 2 trucks. They're both used for business. My hot rods are not used for business. The tractor, I guess it could be used for business. I don't use it currently for business. My camper isn't for business. I think that's all that I'll be able to fit in there. I have an enclosed trailer too, that is used for business.
Okay. Do you have employees that like report to the?
No, I do not. I don't have any employees, actually. It's
Okay.
just me.
Okay. And then from the site plan drawing, do you share a driveway with the 6848? Does it?
I do, yes.
Okay. No other questions?
Okay.
Leah?
Once it's completed, do you plan on putting like any vegetation forward of the barn or in that area?
So do you mean, so when you say forward of the barn, do you mean like on the south end? So,
Yes.
yeah, the south end. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to doing that. If that helps get it approved, I would definitely do that.
Okay.
So you guys don't want to see it, so you wouldn't want to see it from the road?
Well, the only reason I'm asking is because the other properties don't have those barns forward of the house. It's more open. And with the others that we got the past couple of months, there was a lot of trees, a lot of vegetation, so you didn't see it. So I'm just bringing that up.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to planting trees or a hedgerow of some sort in front of there that would grow over time and maybe completely block that whole south end of the barn so that you couldn't see it.
Making that big a barn is, gonna take a lot of foliage.
Yeah. Well, I'm willing to plant it if you guys are willing to approve it.
That's all I had.
So as Matt indicated, I think you acknowledged, this is a new construction. And that'd be, yes.
Yes, sir.
So when I look at the plan, I'm looking at the drawing, mark sheet 1/1.
On the board?
Yeah, that's on the board. So where it shows future garage, why didn't you put the house there and then put the garage where it's labeled 6850 and comply with the code?
I wanted to see the golf course. I set the house back almost, I think it's as far back as I could legally get it. so that I could get the golf course view.
Hold on one second. So gets into the needs and the wants. So what we have is, one of the criteria, I think hopefully you've looked at it, is whether or not the applicant can achieve this by some feasible method. All right, hopefully, you know what I'm talking, there's
Oh,
5
yes,
criteria.
yep, I read through
But
it.
that's,
yes.
that's the questions that were, some of the questions that's driving at this, is did you have an opportunity to comply with the code? And you did. You chose, because you wanted to look at the golf course. That's your choice. That's where you wanted the house. And now you're asking for the variance to put the barn forward of the house.
Yes, sir.
And there's also a shared driveway, and as far as I know, that hasn't even started construction yet. So your neighbors to the east and to the west, I guess we don't know what's going to happen to the east just yet, but at least to the west, they're not looking at a house, they're going to look at a pole barn. So then we look to the first criteria, is it going to change the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties? Potentially, the answer is going to be yes, it will. There's, in that particular area, to Fred's point, there aren't pole barns or barns or, that doesn't exist. So that has the potential for changing the character of the neighborhood. So you're going to have some time to think about it, all right? When you come back, hopefully you'll have some answers about, there's a pole barn over here just down the road, or something that shows that in that neighborhood that there are similar types of conditions that exist.
So, let me ask you this. If you were my neighbor on the east side, you would rather have a pole barn in the backyard than in the front side yard of my yard?
Not what the neighbor would
About your neighbor to the
rather-
west?
It's not what the neighbor would
What's that?
rather have. The question is, can you comply with the code? Did you have an opportunity to comply with the code? And you did. And that jumps to the 5th criteria, was this self-created? So you created the problem. The problem being that you want to put a pole barn on the property forward of your home,
Yep,
okay?
yes, sir.
We're not asking, if you know what the answer is today, then fine. If you don't, you have some time to think about it, and if need be, seek help. Or you're asking good questions, we're asking questions, but when the day is done, we have a duty and obligation to the community to comply with not only the code, but also if we grant a variance, we have to plug in facts to this set of criteria. All right, does that make some sense?
Yep, I understand.
All right, any questions?
Nope.
All right, great.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Where are you currently storing everything that you?
It's in the yard
Okay,
currently.
no other questions then?
Would anyone from the public want to speak for or against the application?
About the application, yeah.
Sure, come on up, tell us who you are.
I live in those 2 little boxes up there to the
Come
left.
Just
closer.
make sure you're in the microphone.
Tell us who you are.
Gary Douglas Hewer, H-E-U-E-R, 6854 Boughton Hill Road, and I'm the 2 little houses to the left. I gotta live next to Scott, and I don't wanna, I don't wanna create, issues and problems. My problem is basically with the board, okay? I've lived here for 30 years, and if I can take just a little time to give you a little history lesson about that piece of property, because it's been nothing but problems to everybody who's lived alongside of it, okay? The guy who had the house next door ran into some gambling problems over at the racetrack, and they banned him from the track. So he decided, because he had houses, that he was going to put an exercise circle around the property that is right next, not next to, but the next one over.
6820, what, to the east?
To the east, there's got one blank and then one other, there's a house on it, okay? And the barn fell down, and there were issues about how are we gonna get rid of that? And it sat for years, and there were kids getting into it, and nobody wanted to, address the issue, okay? So what he did was he screwed up the water system. There's some underground stuff in there, and it got all wet in the front. And in the summertime, it would back up, and we had 1 year in general that it backed up so far, it went all the way over about 20 feet from my property. That in conjunction with the work that they did that year on County Road 41, we had mosquitoes like, they were as big as planes, okay? Drainage over there was also interrupted by Mr. Dianetti, who owned the golf course, when he put the 8 holes in it, the last 8-hole course he put in the back, okay? Because he's got everything coming from a high spot draining into my property. And right where my property line is, and I have pictures if you want to see it, it gets about 6 inches deep in a gully that runs all the way across the back of my house. He also came and he had 55 acres in that lot, and he spent a good 3 or 4 weeks with some guy with a bulldozer moving all the dirt around in there in order to create at least a 32-foot high driveway that was going to be shared on this particular property in order to get in there. Whenever I would come down to talk to the board and it was on the agenda, all of a sudden I'd ask Mr. Dianetti, when are you going to talk about this? Oh, we're not ready for that, okay, and we pulled it off the schedule. Oh, okay, fine. So come to the next meeting, but, if I come to the meeting, everything's pulled off, the agenda. Okay. I traveled at that particular point in time with my wife, and I wasn't home all the time, So it got passed. Next thing that happened was he was going to try to make 2 pieces of property out of it. Okay. Well, at one point in time, he was going to put at least 4 houses in there, and the only way that he could do it was to put in a septic system for everybody along the road in order to get enough resources in order to handle the waste from that property. And he wasn't successful in talking everybody out of their septic systems and going with a sewer system there. The next thing that happened is because its precedent was set, they cut that property in half. The one next door, he put the house up, they had that. So now he's got 2 lots instead of 1. Mr. Dianetti could never get a perk test to work until he did it in the middle of one of the worst droughts that we had years ago, and they only dug holes this deep. I watched it. And all of a sudden, he's got the property. Now he's got 2 pieces. Sir?
Is this tied to the application that's before?
I'm getting there. The water from all of this drainage lines up, and it lays right on the property line over. That's kind of the end of it. His property is up high. The town board has made him pay for having all of this regraded and redrawn all again. And Dianetti told me that he spent, what was the number? $125,000 in bulldozing costs creating that property. I'm pretty sure that's what the number was. I am concerned that I'm never going to get anything in the back of my house but a flood area. And the flood has got to go down into a culvert that goes across under the road and just lays there, okay? I would like to see, and he's going to put right in that pathway where on some of your drawings here, it shows that the drainage is going to go, that's a drainage area. I want somebody to basically make me confident that I'm not going to get, drained out. I can't even get grass to grow. The other thing Dianetti did was he didn't make behind my house a, what do they call it, forever forest?
Conservation easement?
Yeah, it's conservation easement. But he did the people next door to me and the one for Hart, which is the next house over. And the other people had the option to buy the property. He wouldn't sell to me to get the property back. I don't know why. As far as the barn is concerned, I've got one right next door. It's probably, less than 30 feet away from where he's got his trailer right now. I don't care if he puts up a barn, and I don't care if it's in front of his house or in back of his house, but if he's gonna put it there, I wanna make sure that I don't lose what little drainage area down to the thing is gonna come about. Yeah?
Right.
And it seems like you put these laws in place, but the minute, and even across the street, the precedent's been set for cutting those properties in half. Monica Hammond had property there, and now it's two pieces of property. It was 13 acres over there.
Right, for clarity purposes, this board does not create the laws. That's not our purview, that's the town board that creates them. This board is only, has the duty to look at the code and see whether or not a variance should be granted based on the 5 criteria that the law requires we're to look at.
Okay.
Whether or not it's going to change the character of the neighborhood, whether or not it's substantial, whether or not the applicant had an opportunity, a feasible means to do it and comply with the code, whether or not there's any kind of environmental impact, whether or not it was self-created. I'm pretty sure the questions that were being asked by this board
We might-
in some way, shape, or form were asking to have those facts fit into the criteria.
Okay, well, my question basically is this particular building going to help or hinder the drainage that is supposed to be coming down there, but isn't now because, it was originally designed that way, but now it can't come up and go down.
So there's a question then on whether or not the barn being forward of the home is going to create an environmental impact, a negative environment. We're going to find out. We may not have that today, but we're going to get to the bottom of it and figure it out.
But it seems like every time, something happens with those properties around there, a variance shows up.
I can't,
it's getting-
honestly,
it's
I don't
granted.
remember the last, I've been on this board for almost 20 years. I can't remember the last time we've actually had a variance in this neck of the woods. Now, subdividing properties isn't a variance.
I guess not.
We had a variance request actually just down the street from you that we denied, or maybe the applicant withdrew because they're working on that 2 or 3 family home, trying to refurb it. Honestly, I don't recall many, if any, variances
It was only one house.
given.
I'd been there for so long.
I mean, I've seen quite a few houses. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's half a dozen to a dozen homes within, just go straight down County Road 41 until you hit Brace Road, right? It's quite a bit, and completely understand there's been subdividing going on, and, landowners have certain rights, but I'm just saying
Granted, but none of their houses flood because.
complaining to the wrong board. You're complaining to the wrong board.
Goes over.
I think you're complaining to
Sir,
the
can I
wrong
interrupt for
board.
a second?
Excuse me?
Just, should this applicant receive the area variance to allow the barn in front of his home, the size of his barn requires him to go to the planning
His
board.
barn is going to be a third bigger than the one I've got next door to it.
Okay. All my point is that it'll have to go to the planning board. And it's the planning board who's going to address things like grading and drainage. And that's going to be the board you're going to want to come talk to with your concerns beyond the variance, okay? Just so you know. There's another step that Mr. Hellinger is going to have to take should he receive, this board is only to grant a variance to allow a structure in a location that's not permitted by code. That's it. Okay, all the drainage and stuff will be addressed by the planning board. You'll be notified again because of your proximity, and that's the board you're going to want to bring your drainage concerns to, okay? Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Anyone else from the public want to speak for or against the application? Have any questions for us before we let you go? Otherwise, we'll see you on September 18th. Go ahead.
So if I come back September 18th, you guys want to know setbacks, correct?
It's the,
Or an idea of a setback?
no better than an idea. So the location as it pertains to how far it is from the road, how far it is from your side, the east, the west, is going to be important, because what we don't want is the applicant say, oh gee, we got the variance, and then start putting your thumb up in the air and saying, it goes over there. This is
Understood.
poor record keeping.
Understood.
Survey maps, specific locations on where it's going to be. And right now, I mean, if you're going to, if the variance is granted and it impacts the side setback, there's requirements for that as well. So we can't tell you if you need a variance for that, but I can tell you, if you put it 5 feet from the side setback, you're going to need another variance.
No, it won't, it will not be 5 feet.
Okay.
It'll be 15 at minimum.
Hopefully you understand my point, is it has to be specific to where it is you want to put it, to see if you need another variance.
Okay, understood.
And I think you were hearing some questions. I would highly recommend you talk to your builder and be prepared for questions regarding whether or not there would be any kind of environmental impact should the variance be granted and that barn be constructed forward of the home. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Any questions?
I'll get an answer also on the back. I'll get like an email or something from BME about the possibly putting it in the back and whatever impact it would have, if I can drive on it, if I can't, if it matters, if I'm in the expansion field area, because I don't know that answer right now. I can try and get it, and then maybe that'll change. Maybe I can comply and go up in the up. There's tons of room on the right side of my property to put a building like that and to be in compliance.
Those are going to be.
I do have one question, though. What is the rear, is the rear setback for a building like that 40 foot? Is it 15 for the rear?
Rear and side.
Okay, all right. I'm good.
No
There's a
portion of the barn
difference.
can be forward of the home, though. It's not just like the whole thing. None of it could be forward of the home without variance. Okay?
None of it. So when you say forward of the home, do you mean none of it can stick past the front of my house?
Correct.
It can go down the side of my house?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So as far as the feasibility element, there are times applicants have come before us and said, well, I don't like how it looks. I'd rather not. It's really not a good enough reason as far as the board goes. It's, can you comply with the code? And other applicants have said, it won't work because the topography is terrible. It's a steep slope and I can't build it back there. That's far different than, I don't like how it looks. You follow me, that there's a big difference
Yeah,
between needs and wants.
and I guess I'll have to get somebody out there to look at that too. There is a slope back there. It's not a big slope. I don't know if it would change, well, just like what he's talking about. I don't know if I put something in there, I gotta talk to someone to see if it's gonna change how that property drains out, because I don't wanna, I don't wanna mess with the guy who's gonna be building on the property next to me that builds homes.
Well, I think regardless of where you put it, right, it's a impervious surface and it's a lot of it. So regardless of where you put it on the property, you're gonna wanna know what you're gonna do with the water that's not gonna be
Right.
The engineer, we've had engineers from BME before. They understand what variances are, the elements that need to be shown, what facts need to be plugged in. So talk to them, you've hired them on how all this mechanism works.
Okay. All right, sounds
set?
good. Thank you.
Just a quick question, if he were to come out of the,
Come on up, I
Can't hear you
can't hear
back
you.
there.
if he were to come out with his sewage pipe from the, that drawing is, the left side of his house, which would be the west side, and curve down, he would have enough room in order to go where that supposed runway is supposed to be, and then put the sword that's flat enough down at the bottom where he was gonna put the building in order to put his septic tank. His drain tank, what do you call it, drainage field. And there wouldn't be any driving over it that way. Is that something that is considered okay in your book?
You're asking a bit of an ifs and buts kind of question. Until we have the applicant say, this is what we're doing, this is how
Yeah, I'll
we're.
talk to him about it then.
So, yeah, talk to him afterwards. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, see you on the 18th. All right, mobile graphics. How are you?
Good, how are you, Mike?
Good. I understand that there's been a change. The 2 accessory apartments have been withdrawn.
That is correct.
So now the question is whether or not, from what I see, is the issue is whether or not there is a new use variance being requested, or if it's just a modification. Right? And I think it's your position is it's just the modification looking for the number of employees, the showroom, and the additional building. Is that it in a nutshell?
That's it in a
All
nutshell.
right. So, because it was before the county planning board, they looked at it with the apartments included. Now we have an issue of whether or not it has to go back to the county planning board for another review because of its proximity. So we have our counsel here, if you could touch on
It's a
that.
good question, Mr. Chairman, because I do believe the county planning board approval on the first plan or proposal. None requires under 239M a supermajority vote of this board if they decide to approve the current.
Hold on.
I mean, I think, sorry. I think the recommendation of going back to the county planning board is one that you guys might want to consider. The notes of the county planning board are not that helpful, but they did note the accessory apartments, and they did appear, reading through the lines, not to be pleased about the apartments. So I think it might behoove you to consider, or having this board referred back to them. Obviously, they can still issue a disapproval, but with the new proposal, they may very well not, and then you're now, as you know, subject to only a majority vote by this board for approval.
Okay. I think in that case, what I'd like to do is present tonight as we had
Sure.
intended. Perhaps kind of canvass the board, get a feel for what everybody's thinking, and if we are at a stage where any of the board members are uncomfortable voting or approving, rather than taking a vote tonight, then obviously, that option we'd like to put back on the table. Just, we don't want to self-impose any additional adversity if we don't have to.
So, Mr. Chairman, do you also want me to weigh in on whether a new use variance is required by this board, or modified use variance?
I think it would be very helpful if the board heard your opinion that if it is solely a modification of the use variance, do we apply the criteria as we would for a use variance, or is it a different criteria that we look at for a modification?
So I do agree, and I know Adam issued a memo to this board, and I believe, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, you also stated that you think a new use variance was required. You thought a modified use variance was what was necessary. And I agree with that. I do, however, believe that this board still has to apply the 5 criteria that you would do to a new use variance to the modified variance. Having said that, a number of that criteria, by mere fact of the prior use variance being granted, has already been determined. For example, the unique nature of the property, and the fact that the use that it's currently being conducted, or the use that's currently being conducted by the applicant, does not create an adverse impact on the community, to the environment. I think for the use itself has already been addressed. This board may, however, feel that the enlarged use that the modified application seeks, you may want to still go through that analysis. I would recommend that you still go through that analysis for the modification. The financial evidence of not being able to secure a reasonable rate of return, well, that has already largely been determined by the existing use variance because the analysis remains the same. Could they obtain a reasonable rate of return if they were subject to the residential requirements of the district? This board's already determined that's not the case. In my mind, in my opinion, the use per se is not changed. They just wish to increase the capacity of the use. I think one of the areas that the board will want to look at is the fifth criteria, and that is granting a minimum variance, scope of variance, but also taking into consideration that the variance, if issued, that the character of the community is protected and that the welfare of the community or the neighborhood is protected. That's, I think, a criteria that you may still want to go through as a result of the modified scope of the use that they're presenting to you. In sum, I think some of the elements of the requisite criteria have already been addressed by this board, but then others of the requisite criteria, I think this board should go through a review of it with respect to the modified increased scope of the use that the applicant's proposing, if that makes sense to everybody.
I think it does. For clarity purposes, though, is it before the board on whether or not we're looking at solely a modification, or are we looking at, a better question, the apartments are off the board.
Correct.
It's not a whole new use variance anymore. It's solely a use variance, and this board doesn't have to try and decipher whether or not it's a new or it's a modification. We're only looking at a modification.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. I think the original proposal with the accessory apartment complicated the assessment for you, and it may very well have kicked the application into a new use variance application. Now that the applicant has removed that, the use that they're proposing with the modification remains the use that is already been operating on the existing
How
variance.
does it, if you're asking to also add, for example, a sales and marketing or a showroom, you're adding to the use of the
That
property
goes to
for-
the increased scope of the use, but the use itself, the retail or commercial use that he is doing on the property now to his existing variance, by and large, that remains the same. He's just adding to the scope of that use.
What scope? But you're
With
saying,
through a
but
modification.
you're saying adding scope, new scope.
No, not a new,
It's new scope, right?
he has
I
an
mean,
existing scope of his use.
Right.
He wants to enhance it, but still consistent with the commercial use that he's operating on the property today. By adding the storage building, adding the employees, adding some parking area, as I saw on the site plan. I don't know if that's true. So the use itself, the commercial use, remains the same, that he's operating on his current use variance. He just wants to enhance it, but still consistent with the commercial use that he's conducting today under the existing variance. So I think those enhancements are what you need to, as a board, go through the criteria for.
We're prepared to address all of those concerns.
I assumed you were, but
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure the board understands my opinion and what I think you need to do on
So
this.
before we proceed, anyone else from the board have a question for council? Good? Okay, so I think the first question for you and your clients is whether or not you would like to refer this back to the county for their evaluation and untangle the two concepts of, now the apartments are out of the way solely. We're still going to give you the opportunity, though, to present, but I think it would be helpful for us on our questions if we know, are you going to go to the planning board or not? And if you want to take a few minutes out in the hall, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, and just a quick second.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Sorry if that was verbose.
No, it was good,
fine.
it was thorough. It's, yeah, it was certainly a unique situation.
Yeah, I mean, it is very unique. I don't think I've ever either presented a modified use variance on behalf of an applicant or represented a municipal board for a modified use. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, right.
I have a question about the showroom.
Well, hold on, let's,
Water fountain?
I think let's have them back in, so.
Okay.
Your question, and
All right.
Every day.
Right. Anything else?
We should really make a TV show about clothes
We think about it all the time. Try to get them to buy us
like Discovery
body
Channel.
cams.
Now I'm serious.
Thank you. I think, based on the information we'll be able to present tonight, we're comfortable proceeding tonight without having to go back to the county planning board.
So and then I'm going to have a question for council then. They've stated, council stated that they're comfortable proceeding. With that in mind, for a granting of the use variance modification, it's going to have to be a supermajority.
Correct. 4 out of the 5 of you will have to vote to approve the application.
I think what we can do, and I think what you were referring to that before, is if you get a feel, it's like, I think we would much rather send it up to the county planning board and untangle those two pieces and then come back. We'll give you that chance to do it.
Okay.
All right, fair enough?
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Let's hear
All
what you
right,
got.
for the record, I am James Bonsignor from Woods Ovia Gilman on behalf of the applicants. And I know this application's been before you for some time, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel, so I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. But as Frank mentioned, I think as we run through the statutory criteria, we'll be able to answer and address the questions and concerns and some of the additional questions that were in Adam's letter of August 31st. So I'm going to go a little bit in reverse order since the issue's already come up, and that's in the granting of the, in this case, modification of the use variance to ensure that the minimum, or that the relief granted is the minimum necessary in order for the applicant to achieve their goals. And you've hit on one big point along those lines already, and that's they've removed the accessory apartments from the application. Fully understanding that that would put this into a different category, different creature, whatever euphemism you'd like to use, and shifting this from a modification to a new application, they've opted to remove that from the equation. So that in and of itself is an immediate step to make sure that any relief that will be granted here is going to be the minimum necessary. And in doing so, there's a pretty drastic reduction in the size of the new building as well. So originally, it was proposed to be approximately 7,500 square feet. Now we're down to about 3,800 square feet, 3,900 square feet. So the building size has been effectively halved from what was originally proposed. And that's an important point because when you look at the site as it is, there is already an existing 2,400 square foot accessory structure on site. So basically, we're tearing down the existing structure and replacing it one that's a little bit larger. So in terms of, the minimum necessary to grant the application, when you take all of those things into consideration, especially the fact that the new building is marginally larger than what is already there and is of newer construction, better looking building, et cetera. I think you'll find that what we're doing, in addition to the additional employees and what's been called a showroom, I think you're going to find that it's we're definitely in keeping with protecting the character of the neighborhood and not adversely affecting in any way the health, safety, or welfare of the surrounding community. So with that, I'm going to run back to the beginning of the statutory criteria, and this is one that was already discussed a little bit as well, and that's whether or not the applicant could see a reasonable return on the investment in the property with respect to a residential or permitted use. Again, I agree with council that this is an issue that has already been determined, but we understand, these are different times. That application was granted a long time ago. So we wanted to make sure that we presented some additional evidence to further bolster and support the board's decision in making that finding originally. So what we did, we contacted Revolution Real Estate as the local real estate agent that deals in both residential, commercial real estate in the area, and we had them do an analysis for us. And we presented a package from them that discusses, new residential construction, which would be a requisite for this property if they were to sell it for a permitted use. And what they did is they found a couple of comparables, and then also, if you look on the second page of their presentation, you'll see a location map that shows our site, the sites of the two comparable sales, and then the sites of additional homes for sale in the area. Our engineers also provided us some information regarding the demolition costs. As it is, this is a commercial use, which we now know it has been for over 30 years. In order to sell the property for residential use, we'd have to demolish not only the existing accessory structure, but also the larger structure in which the existing commercial use is housed. So right off the bat, we've got about $100,000 worth of, demolition costs, approximately 3/4 of which can be attributable to having to demolish the existing commercial building. So right off the bat, in terms of reasonable return, they're in the hole close to $100,000. Then, as you see, based on the values for new home construction and the comparable sales, they're averaging those sales netted anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 less than the median sale price would be for residential property in the area, and they've attributed that reduction in intrinsic value to those sales on the basis of the proximity to I-90. And this is a subject that, for better or worse, I have a lot of unique experience with because I grew up on Reeves Road in Pittsford, New York, which is directly adjacent to I-90. And I can't tell you how many nights as a kid I was woken up by truck horns, trucks hitting their brakes, loud engines revving, et cetera. And we've got a very, very similar situation here. It is not the most ideal location for a residential use, especially if you want to open your windows in the summer. And that notion is further evidenced by the fact that there's, if you look to the Sunset Manor subdivision, just a little bit further up the road, there are at least four lots, 4 available home sites that have been on the market for 2.5 years. So the desirability of building a new home in a location such as this is not ideal by any means. So when you factor in the demolition costs, the fact that even if you are able to sell it, you're going to sell it for a drastically reduced value based on the median cost for new home construction in the area. And then the fact that you've got 4 other lots that honestly are situated similarly, but not even as close as this subject property is to I-90, and they haven't been able to sell those for 2.5 years. I think it's pretty evident that in order to convert this back to a residential use is not going to be economically feasible in any way for them. So on that basis, I think we meet the first criteria in showing that they're not able to reap a reasonable return on trying to convert this for a residential use. The second issue, again, council alluded to, and that's whether or not the hardship is unique to the property and does not otherwise affect a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. Again, that's been established, and if you look at the location of the property, it's right up against I-90. There are other residential homes around it, but because of the way this lot is situated, with a proximity to I-90, as opposed to having, some of the vegetative buffer that the other surrounding properties have, that could potentially buffer that noise from I-90. It's a very different physical situation from the other homes and properties in the neighborhood. And again, that also goes back to the first criteria. In order to achieve that kind of vegetative buffer, that's another tens of thousands of dollars in cost to make this a viable residential lot, in order to install that kind of vegetation or sound buffer to make this a desirable residential location. So those two criteria actually kind of tie together. Again, the third criteria, whether or not it will change the essential character of the neighborhood or have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions. In this case, we're tearing down a smaller building and putting up a building that's about 1,000 square feet bigger. And that's really, in terms of the physical change to the property, the only real difference. The newer structure will be a little further front-loaded on the property, but again, it's going to be newer construction, it's going to be in keeping with the construction of the main building, so aesthetically, it's going to look better than what's there now. To kind of talk about some of the other criteria in terms of the use of that structure, again, you know, we're in an odd situation, you know, between the pandemic and between the applicant's issues at their other location on Main Street that had burned down some years ago. It's a bit of a catch-22. Business is good, and they'd like to expand upon that, but at the same time, again, it would be cost prohibitive to try and move the entire operation off-site, either to purchase or rent a new space, because of the financial factors in trying to sell the property. You know, they would really only be limited to selling the property for another similar commercial use that could go into the existing structures. So it all ties together. And the reason I bring that up is because we are seeking to add 2 additional employees and to utilize that additional building. But again, the intensity of the use for outside viewers is going to be nominal at best. You know, there would be 1 or 2 extra cars parked on site on any given day. And the use would be contained within the building. That's the whole purpose of constructing the newer, slightly larger building, is to ensure that there is no impact, visual or otherwise, to the surrounding community by containing everything on site in the building and making sure that that impact, if any, is minimal at best. Likewise, with the showroom, as it's been described, I think that's a bit of a misnomer, because this isn't like a typical business, you know, like, say, a flooring store or a home improvement store, where they're going to be setting up, you know, mock kitchens or things like that. And, you know, people who could just be driving by, you know, say, hey, you know, we've been talking about redoing the kitchen, let's pop in there and, you know, see what our options are. See, that's not this type of business. Any customers that come to site are usually existing customers coming to check on status of the order or pick up an order. You know, likewise, they don't advertise. And to answer one of the questions in your letter, no, there is not going to be any proposed signage on either building, in keeping with the original grant when the Baileys were here in 2006. So to the extent there's a quote-unquote showroom, yes, there may be some sample pieces in there for people to look at when they come in to pick up their orders, or if somebody calls, you know, through word of mouth and says, hey, this is what I'm interested in doing. Do you have anything I can take a quick look at before I make a decision? Yes, that would be available. But the intensity of those visits and the frequency, it's not their business. It's not what they're looking, it's not what they want. You know, so to call it a showroom is really more of, it's really more of a glorified waiting room with a couple of sample pieces. And, you know, any of the board members, should you not feel comfortable in approving the application, are more than welcome to come to the property and see what they've got out there if you haven't already. And I think it'll be pretty evident that this isn't what you would typically refer to as a showroom. But again, you know, they do need that little bit of extra space in case, you know, the customers do have questions. But the vast majority of trips generated to the site, you know, vehicles in and out, delivery vehicles, that's really not going to change significantly, if at all, from what's there now. It's just a matter of having a little extra space to service their customers a little more quickly with some potential additional equipment and a couple extra hands. I mean, that's really what it boils down to in terms of the request from the board in that regard. So, to be honest, you'll probably see more traffic trips from Amazon post-pandemic in the area than you're ever going to see generated by this use. The last criteria is always a tough one because no matter when you're talking about a variance area use, there's always some kind of element of self-creation. But in this case, I've been doing this 25 years, and I think this is one of the best cases that I've got in showing that this wasn't a self-created hardship, because we have a 30-year history of this property, and a 30-year history of the zoning board acknowledging that this property in particular is not ideal for residential use. And year after year, through multiple applications, this board has routinely and continually found that, a commercial use of this nature is suitable for this location. So to that extent, any modification of the existing variance in terms of self-creation, the use, as council mentioned, is already there. All we're trying to do is just make sure that the business continues to remain viable, and to do so, again, a couple extra hands, little extra space, and that's it in a nutshell. So with that, if the board has any questions, we're happy to answer.
All right, before I do, and counsel, correct me if I'm wrong, but your analysis was really based on the property being returned to a residential and the impracticality of that. Get all that. The use variance has already been granted. You're looking at a modification. So shouldn't your analysis really be the modification of the existing use variance and going through the criteria, for example, showing competent financial evidence on why you need the modification of the permitted use? I think we all get that it's close to the thruway, and the cost of trying to get it back to a residential is astronomical.
Agreed.
So focusing on, and I think we talked about this before, on maybe in a very generic way, love having the business in Victor, it's great, but there's a time that a business, I'm not picking on this particular business, but sometimes businesses outgrow and they get too big and too good for what they're doing, and they don't fit in that piece of property anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, back to my question then, shouldn't the analysis be on the modification that you're looking for, that you need to show competent financial evidence, this be the first criteria, that we need it tweaked here, and this is why, because fill in the blank.
Yeah, I actually gave that a lot of thought, and I understand where you're coming from, but when we're dealing with the statutory criteria, it deals with the reasonable return for a permitted use. And, it's a bit of a gray area, because is this technically a permitted use? Well, it's only permitted by way of the use variance, so it's not technically a permitted use. It's one that had to get special dispensation from this board in order to operate. So, we struggled with that analysis as well. In terms of, the economics of expanding the business here, again, I think it goes to the overall criteria of ensuring that the grant is the minimum necessary in order for them to achieve their goals. The business is expanding and they're comfortable with what's being proposed, that they will be able to meet their customers' needs on site without having a detrimental effect to the community, and they're comfortable with the space that they're seeking. And to go beyond that, that would be wonderful if they could, but they're not at that stage yet. So the space that is being requested is more than sufficient right now for their needs in terms of any kind of expansion of the business or ensuring that they're able to continue to meet their customers' needs. So I know it's a roundabout way of answering your question, but, you know,
Let's get some questions. Alexis, you got questions?
Why did you reduce the size of the building?
It was twofold. Like I said, one of the reasons was because we withdrew the request for the accessory apartments, which would have been included in this building. So that alone reduces the size of the building. And in reviewing the withdrawal of that request, they re-examined the size of the structure and, again, to meet the criteria, reduced it to what is pretty much the minimum that they need to accomplish their goals.
And then I think at one of the previous meetings, there was a comment about neighbors and apple trees. Did you settle that issue? Neighbor who was concerned about.
She hasn't acknowledged, I'm sorry. Chris Bailey, 650 Old Dutch Road. The neighbor we have contacted, she has not given us feedback. We sent letters. I've talked to her. I did show her, after we talked about that, I showed her the line of the apple trees. It's 15 feet back. She hasn't brought up any more concern to that. We can replant stuff if that had to be an agreement, but I don't think it's a outlasting concern. She hasn't been present in any of the meetings or sent letters or anything, so I haven't gotten a voice of how concerned she is about, the project overall.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Leah, questions?
With the reduction of the size of the building, well, at the May 15th meeting, when it was going to be 7488 square feet, you had allocated approximately like 840 square feet for the storage, because the other was for the accessory apartments and then whatever hallways and other rooms were in there. So now that it's going to be 3840, are you anticipating storing more stuff in this building than you were originally?
The storage area is basically scaled down the same way that it was in the first proposal. It's almost 2/3 storage with a third use for the business. The storage factor is more personal, but it's also, overflow. If we did have to get another chunk of it for business use later on, the building's there. But
So a lot of the storage is going to be stuff that you had in this old building that you plan on
Correct.
taking down, some personal
Correct.
stuff. And is it going to be just like an open storage, like an open building, kind of?
it won't be completely open. It'll have a wall between the two areas to
So it'll be like
separate
2
business
rooms.
from storage.
Yeah. And what other, I know you'll have electricity in there. What other utilities do you plan on having in there?
We plan on having a bathroom over there.
Mhm. Okay. And I just want some clarification, because I saw something in your letter, Mr. Wood, on page 2, item 2. It said the single residential neighbor other than the Bailey's home. I thought you sold the property?
That should have been updated.
Yep.
That was an error.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry about that. But you actually hit on an excellent point when asking about the storage. Again, in terms of expanding the commercial use that's permitted under the use variance, just because there's the construction of a new building, again, as Chris just mentioned, it's not entirely for the business. So that's, by utilizing, you said about 2/3, basically. So, the net increase in terms of business use is about 1,000 square feet, give or take. So again, keeping the use, the proposal to the minimum necessary that they need just for a little bit of overflow for the existing building. The remainder of it will be the same exact personal storage use as exists now.
Okay, that's all for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my questions are similarly along the lines of where Mike was going earlier, in that normally someone would seek a use variance and maybe or maybe not a modification because of some hardship. And I wouldn't put business growth in the hardship. Every business obviously wants to grow, aspires to grow, generally needs to grow. Trying to figure out what those tripwires would be then for the modification versus an incremental use variance. I mean, for example, if they wanted, their growth plan said, we need 6 more employees, how would I weigh that differently than 2? If they needed 8 or 10 or 50, like what would be, and maybe it's a question to our council as well, is what really are those tripwires that would turn this from a modification to, well, you're really asking for additional use. It is the same use. I'm completely on board with that, and I appreciate the debate we had earlier, but it's the same use, but it's a larger footprint or a larger density of the same use on the same parcel. And I mean, if the numbers here were all double or triple, I think we'd all, you would have had the exact same pitch to us, right? And probably our council would have said the same thing, and we'd be going, well, okay, they're asking for 40 people, like how, and I'm just trying to understand what the tripwires are, like what would it,
Yeah, I mean.
I don't know, we're in a gray area here.
Yeah, you're in a gray area. If you look at the 5 criteria, and the financial criteria, to answer the chairman's question, I believe that relates back to residential, the potential residential use of the property. If we were to remove this use variance, rescind it from them, to try to, do a residential use on that property, the reasonable rate of return analysis it goes to that. It doesn't go to the enhancement of the use. It really still relates back to if they had to be forced to develop this as a residential use. I think.
The current use is now an allowed use.
Yeah, it's a permitted use now. It's not, it's a use variance that runs with the land, which is treated like a permitted use. Number 2, the alleged hardship, I think it still goes back to the original assessment that was done by this board for the previous variance that they had issued, as well as the self-created hardship. I mean, as council has indicated for numerous times, this board has determined that has not been a factor that has prevented a use variance being granted. In my mind, criteria 3 and 5 are really the criteria that you need to, as a board, assess this enhanced use that they would like to do on the property. And that is, if granted, will alter the character of the neighborhood or will have an adverse effect on the physical environment. And again, granting the minimum variance and deemed necessary, but also ensuring that, and adequate to address the unnecessary hardship, but at the same time ensuring that the character of the neighborhood is preserved and protected, as well as the welfare and safety of the community. To me, 3 and 5 really appear to be the factors that stand out the most in this board's assessment of the variance being, the enhanced variance being requested. And of course, and you know this already, although area variances are exempt from seeker, use variances are not. And the applicant has provided a short environmental assessment for it, so this board will have to make a secret determination as well, which also requires this board to think about the potential adverse environmental impacts that might result from the enhanced use.
And I think you just kind of touched on one of the important points and one of the reasons why we went back and examined the financial criteria with respect to the residential side of things is because under the terms of the code, it's whether or not under the regulations, Well, the regulations say that this should be residential, and that's why we went that direction, just as you kind of indicated here, because that's what the code requires of us. And that's what the code requires us to analyze. So that's why we did that. And again, in terms of the use, you know, the 2 employees and a little bit of additional space, you know, the net effect is nominal at best. Again, we're doing a new building that's nicer, newer, still maintaining the residential storage use. You know, so we've tried to kind of craft everything to make sure that we kind of press all the buttons, if you will.
I'm with you on that, and you know, after the discussion tonight and the removal, I'm on board with the way this is now. What I'm just trying to understand is, well, what if in a year you need 4 more employees? I mean, it is possible, and it happens all the time with our, you know, commercial areas. You can outgrow your site. At some point, you may be successful enough that it's like, I either need another site or I need to move and expand into a larger location.
So I think at that point, you as a board have to determine, is it so big now that it's completely out of character of the neighborhood? Is it beyond the scope of the minimum variance?
Okay, almost every ask.
Is it going to create a potential impact to the environment and the safety of the community? That, you may determine as a board at that point, if they come back and they want 20 employees, say, no, we now determine that you don't meet that. Those factors outweigh the fact that you still have financial hardship, you still have, and it doesn't mean that their use variance goes away. It just means they can't have 20 employees. They've got to keep it at the level that they have now, which ultimately may result in them deciding, all right, we're so big now, we got to get out of this property, we have to go somewhere else.
And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned, you know, Amazon deliveries. You know, for better or worse, we're living in a brand-new post-pandemic environment where a lot of people are having their food delivered more often. They're having their groceries delivered. They're having all of their retail purchases delivered. So, you know, obviously I don't have exact numbers, but I think we can all agree that there's been a pretty substantial increase in those types of deliveries in the residential areas. And, you know, if you look at the documentation that Revolution Real Estate presented, I mean, you see the extent of the other residential development in the area to the east of the school and further down the road. So, you know, those trips, the addition of 2 employees here and any potential customers is going to be far outnumbered by, you know, the trips in the neighborhood generated by.
And I don't think the debate's ever been about the 2 employees. I think the debate's generally been about, do you have to prove the incremental ask, like Mike was saying, in addition to the use variance, or are you comparing it to the original residential use going forward?
Yeah, use variances are an odd beast, you know, and it's all statutory. So that's why, in trying to maneuver those waters and deal with the financial hardship, I mean, it's easily the most difficult criteria generally to prove when you're trying to do that, and the self-creation are always the hardest when you're trying to establish a use variance. So I think when you view this in the aggregate, bird's eye view, however you want to describe it, and looking at the history of the property, the fact that it's been determined time and time again through multiple applications that, you know, the financial hardship has been met for the use, then it becomes, you know, a subjective determination as to where we go from there.
Agree. It was much more difficult before when there was actual residential use being proposed on the site. So I'm good. No further questions in my mind. I don't think we've crossed any tripwires.
Well, I was wondering what the showroom was when you described that. It's almost nothing, a countertop.
For really, if you know, for
No
personal, I can, on personal, I've been in the showroom, let's just call it a showroom. As a customer, you walk in and there's a counter, there's a few items that show their product, but certainly not is, I think you were using an example of flooring. It's nowhere near that. There's a countertop, you go in, this is what I like, there's a few computer screens, and most of the time, I think their conversation happens when it's like, well, this is what I like, oh, let me show you the graphics, okay, and you come back, and they may show you a sample. It's not the typical, if you will, showroom, it's not a car showroom, it's not a tile, it's not flooring, it's not any of that. It's just a space, I think, where customers come in and out of, and they're not there very long. They know what they want, and at least my experience wasn't there. But
The 206 variance says it would not contain a showroom, and on the letter of intent, it didn't say anything about a showroom. And then there was a letter from DDS outlining the variances, and it showed up as a variance requirement. Is it still? Is the showroom still
yeah,
listed as, and there's nothing to it?
Yeah, the
Why
question.
can't you take it off?
The question was presented to us because of the nature of the space, and in erring on the side of the caution, I think between the applicants, DDS, your office, it was determined that, okay, look, if we're doing this, we should address this just to kind of put the issue to bed. So,
It's trying to comply with the least variance possible. That ought to be an easy one to eliminate.
Who called it the showroom? Did we call it a showroom first, or did you guys call it a showroom first? Just whenever we're getting tripped up over something.
Christine, anything was mentioned about a showroom, but I think our old website never
I
got updated.
can't hear you while you're down there. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Hi, I'm Rhonda Bailey. I think our old showroom was on our old website, and it showed actually pictures of Main Street. And I think that's where Leah got that showroom look from, because we no longer have that storefront. So the new one in 2017, when we built it, I don't think we ever, it's just an entranceway. We never really labeled it a showroom, so I don't know where the room showroom came from.
We don't have, so the word showroom doesn't have to be in the use variance.
I wish it wasn't, but
but I think not to be argumentative, you have products in a room when customers come in that are show people. I think one, if I recall right, it's a big banner that grads like to, or parents of graduates like to use to put on the lawns.
that was actually our lawn sign that said congratulations 2020, which is
Okay.
still there. It's just,
So
somebody
there is
pushed it up in
some,
coroplast.
there is some display, albeit minimal, of the products that you provide. Is it all inclusive? No, it's not. It may be a half a dozen at best of the kind. It's just a little table that was there. So
Yeah.
it's got to be called something.
It's gotta be called something, because I don't dust it very often either, so it doesn't get touched. It's more, you put a plant there, a couple of things there, some
About a
trifolds, like we
display
print
area.
trifolds and leave a couple. But
All right, so the,
again, it's a glorified counter where, I mean, they need something to have their customers come in and pay or look on a computer screen, as you mentioned, to look at graphics and things like that. So, you know, to that extent, if there is any true concern or issue with it, I'm sure we could agree to restriction that it won't be expanded beyond site or.
I guess my question regarding the showroom is more traffic oriented, right? You perceive a showroom as a catch-all to, people going by, hey, let's stop in, like you alluded to earlier. It's not a showroom you're driving by and say, hey, there's flooring, let's go in. It is a place that someone walks in, and we do want it nice. I mean, we try to do everything high-end in the front of our building so that we're selling products. So it is kind of what hits you first. The first 7 seconds you walk into a room, you get exposed to,
The sample display.
Like a
area.
client briefing, look, you walk into your doctor's office, right, and there's pictures and flyers, and you walk, there's if it's a chiropractor like I go to, there's the skeleton, there's all that stuff, right? And I wouldn't call that a showroom, I'd maybe sometimes they use it to explain things to you, and maybe it's more of a customer briefing area or something to that effect, but I was trying to get, if we called it the showroom, then just tell us it's not a showroom, it's something else. If you called it the showroom, then I'm just trying to figure out why you called it the showroom, because you're right, it does have that impression that.
Yeah,
like
to me, it's another gray area. I mean, we do have a place that we make nice for people to come in and have an entrance area.
I
How
think the
how
general-
extensive you get for what every product that's up front, you know?
I'd like to, believe, at least the way I'm looking at it, it's to the number of employees, I think you both said, it's like you are trying to work your way into semi-retirement, get a couple of other employees. So the number of employees going from, I think, what are you currently, 7, you want to go 2 more? That's not my bugaboo. Calling it a showroom display room, that's not my bugaboo. I'll be honest with you, the bugaboo I have, even though you reduce the size of the new structure to half, and I think this is now the second time I've heard it, you're going to use 2/3 of the building for personal use. Now you're mixing in we'd like to expand our business, we need some extra space for, and I want to keep going in there, but for your storage or for business. But now you want to put things, commingle it with your personal stuff, but ride on the coattails of a use variance to make it bigger. So it almost invites the problem of our code enforcement officer saying, well, if it's only going to be used for 1/3 business, then our code enforcement officer has to keep poking his nose in there, or her nose in there, and say, oh, you're well beyond 1/3, you're using it more than what you said you were going to use it for. You understand what I'm concerned about is that, mean what you say what you mean. Asking for a use variance because your business is growing, good thing. You need some modification, not huge modifications. You got to tweak a little bit so you can stay there. But now to insert some personal stuff in there is a big ask.
Well, I view it a little differently, because they already have the ability in a storage facility for personal use on site as it is. So that square footage of the personal use effectively really isn't going to change. You've got about, give or take maybe, a few square feet here or there, but, that personal storage already exists. It's approximately.
Are you referring to the old garage?
Correct.
I understood that nothing's in there and it can't be used, it needs to be knocked down.
Oh, the building needs to be knocked down. That's why we want to upgrade the building to make it better. When everything that's in there has to go somewhere. There's no electric to that.
What's the square footage of it?
What's that?
What's the square footage of the
Is this-
building that's going to be knocked down?
It's about 2,400.
60, 2,400.
2,400 square feet?
So, and as Chris mentioned, in terms of commingling or interspersing personal use with the business use, there's going to be a dedicated wall in segregated space. So that was, again, another consideration to make sure that the business use was wholly separate. And again, trying to minimize trying to minimize the request to that extent. So, that they're looking to improve what they have for personal storage and add a little bit of extra space that's going to be segregated from the personal.
No new things will be added to the personal storage. It's only things that are in the existing garage or the existing barn.
Currently, yes. I mean, as you obtain stuff in life, I mean, it's kind of a benign question, I think.
But Matt jumped, it's fine, but are you willing to put as a condition that if the board grants the modification of a use variance, that business space of 1/3 of 3840 is going to be used for business? If it exceeds and starts to go into your personal space, you're going to be in violation of that use variance modification. Is that fair to say? Maybe you should ask counsel that, or you should
No,
speak for
it is fair to say. Is it also fair to say that we could come back to council and say, we need a bigger chunk in
That's
future
right.
use?
If that's the case, then you got to come back for another use variance modification to go into that personal space. You can't use, because what you're telling this board is the 1/3, 2/3 split, 1/3 being for business, 2/3 being personal, that's how you're painting the picture. And if the board grants the variance, that's how they're looking at it. But if some point down the line, it turns out to be that you're using the entire space for business, you're going to be
Not compliant.
violation. And counsel, am I right in the way that,
Yeah, I think if that's a condition that you're going to put in the expanded or modified use variance, yeah, that would be a violation. But I think you're also telling them, Mr. Chairman, correct me if I'm wrong, to go talk to your council, and if you do want the business portion of that storage to be increased, then come back to this board and show that you're taking half of that space for business. That would require a modification of the application before the board. If you're concerned about not having or outgrowing the allocated share of the storage for business, or the current allocated share.
Guys, I really haven't figured out.
Yeah, I think you missed the beginning story, and I'll just recap. The building that we're putting up right now, that we propose to put up, we have vehicle bays that we do installations and stuff. So we have to pull inside our vehicles, and that eats up a lot of floor space in the larger building, our production shop. So if we can pull those vehicles out and do it next door, we have more floor space that we can put machinery and just spread out tables and laminate and stuff that we're a little tight with the space. So this is gonna give us a lot of room on our current production room by saying that it's a third, because it's still gonna be a bay that's 20 by 65 deep. So it's gonna give us, so you got 40 by 65 and 20 by 65. So the 40 by 65 is basically the same size of the building that's on there. So we're adding 25 feet, basically, and that's gonna be what the business is gonna use. So it's very similar to how everything is used now, except the one bay is where we'll gain the 20
Yeah,
feet
I
by
think
65.
what I understand the chairman saying to you, though, is if you want to rethink taking only a third of that building for business and actually take more of it, now's the time to put that before the ZBA and this board for consideration as part of the modified use variance application.
Okay.
Otherwise, to the chairman's point, if you leave it this way and then the code enforcement office comes out and starts seeing, business stuff on the personal side of the storage, then you'll be technically in violation of the variance.
Correct. I understand that.
Again, in my mind, if you use the entire building, the new proposed building for business purposes, potentially, there's an argument to be made you're going to change the character of the neighborhood. Because you're using the business bigger than what you are proposing you're going to do. Right, and to Matt's point before, asking for 2 employees is far different than asking for 50 employees. That's going to change the character of the neighborhood. Now, that's, my look on it. If you want to talk to council about it, that's fine. But let me just go down quick. Matt, do you have any thoughts about them using or putting a condition of 1/3 to 2/3, or if they use the whole thing for business, that's not as big a concern?
It's not as big of a, only because if you're gonna sell the business, the next person will have to come in front of us then, because I don't see how they're gonna find the right buyer that's gonna say, oh, I want to use 2/3 of this building for my own personal use and not for the business. So, in my opinion, we've kind of done all this, I think, for an extra 1,200 square feet for the business, and we've kind of converted the other square footage into a newer facility or a newer building, right? Because you've demolished the old one. I'm okay with what they wanted to do under that roof. As long as it was related to the business, I'm okay with it. Business or ideally it would be any personal.
I think we're of the same mind, that if the board were to impose a condition that only one of the 3 bays in the new building is utilized for any kind of business use, we're okay with that condition.
Yeah, because to me, the personal storage seems residential, right? I mean, it's not like you're in the business of storing stuff, and it was.
We bought the house in 2000.
Yep.
So all that stuff out there is 23 years old plus. So that barn's falling down. So the initial idea was to.
Yeah, I totally get it, and I'm kind of looking at it
I wasn't
like,
bringing anything from my personal house there. That's what, I kind of felt like you made me feel like we were.
no. I mean,
personal
it's your
there.
stuff, whether it's in your
Yeah,
house or
yeah.
stored off-site.
The reason why we
It's-
did drop down is we've talked about some other ideas too of where else we could, drop the building down, no apartments, that kind of stuff.
It must
So-
be really important stuff, because you're building a nice expansion to put it in there.
Well, we are locked in there. Like you said, someone would have to come back to you guys to decide to do another business there. So That was my feeling from the get-go too, was building another building that matched that one. It's a whole now. Because when I divided the land back before Al retired, he gave me some options of what I could do. And same with Adam. We've been talking for years about this, really, since before Al left. So now I'm just finally putting things in plan and trying to get approvals to see what we are allowed to do before we spend money with more drawings, lawyers, and all that stuff too. So we went simple because we think that's the best way.
To me, I'll make sure, I'm okay as long as it's part of the original business use, I'm okay with 100% of the square footage, because if they come in front of us, we'll have the same discussion, it'll be, well, they're not, unless you're gonna add more people, but if we're not adding more people and you're just gonna put more business stuff in there, I don't see any incremental impact to anything, my opinion, so I'm okay with it.
Alexis?
Just a question. If you're using 2/3 of the building for personal use, how is this a business expense?
Is the business expense?
How do you pay for this as a business if you're gonna use 2/3 of it for your personal use? No.
Well, only a third of it would be for the business use. So, are you asking how they're going to finance the construction?
It just doesn't make sense as to how you would, I guess, finance that if you're gonna be building it all on a, business property, then having 2/3 of it be for personal use, and the business is the one paying for the building?
It's more of an accounting thing.
Yeah, it
Pay
is more of
yourself.
accounting, but it's also, if we put up a building and we only use part of it, you're still paying for that building as a business use. The accountant can look at it and say they can't write off something, but that's gonna be their determination of what we can and cannot do according to those laws. So we'll fall back to them when it comes to the accounting part of it. It's, we have to pay taxes as the business, or however you guys, do that end of it. But for accounting reasons, I'll leave that up to the accountants.
Okay.
Leah, questions?
I think I can further answer that question too. From an accounting perspective, I think we have to take a little bit of a detour in LLC law, limited liability company law, because the Baileys are the sole members of the limited liability company. So the company is effectively, from a taxing perspective, a disregarded entity, and everything trickles down to Chris and Rhonda in any event. So it's whether they write a check from the business account or their own personal account, it's all the same.
Okay.
Another thing had come up about the lighting around the building, because the code says it has to be security lighting.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, and I apologize, I forgot to mention that earlier. There is no proposed change to the lighting. The lighting on the newly constructed building would be code compliant and for security lighting purposes only, just as was required by the original modification that we did in 2006.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's all.
Ed, other questions?
I agree with Matt. I think this has been seen by 2 or 3 boards. They thought it was good, so do I.
Where are we on seeker, Adam? I missed the piece then on, this board has to,
Sorry. They have submitted a short EAF. Next step is for this board to go through Part 2 of that short form EAF and Part 3, and you will, as a board, need to make a secret determination prior to voting on the modified use variance application.
Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but this does have to go before planning board also? Would that be something that the planning board would do?
No, I think the ZBA would typically take the lead status, and it's an uncoordinated review, so no other involved agencies would need to be required to weigh in on it. This board would just proceed on its own with a secret determination. Typically, when it's used in area variances, the ZBA would be the agency that would conduct the secret review.
Just part 2
The board would have to complete Part 2 and Part 3.
and part 3.
Yeah, but this is a short form, it's a much simpler review than a full EAF.
And I think this would be an unlisted action if I'm not,
It is, just unlisted action, uncoordinated review, which means you don't have to coordinate with any other agencies. This board can proceed on its own and make a secret determination on the action.
We have to complete that prior to making a decision?
Yeah, the part two, Adam and I can work together and completing that and getting it to you guys to review and deliberate upon. Again, it's not like the full AF, which is a far more extensive review.
The next opportunity we would have then, presuming part one, part two are completed.
Part one's already been done by the applicant.
Part two and part three.
Yeah.
Once they're completed, then we can make our determination?
Correct. Then you can make your secret determination. That completes seeker.
Could you rip it off while we're sitting here waiting?
I don't have a part two and part three in front of me. I think the best thing to do is this board wasn't in a position to take a vote tonight on this application, or were you?
I was.
I think we were.
I think we were, because
Well-
if they're,
Unfortunately, you can't.
right. So that's.
So I apologize, Jim and applicant, but
At least we figure out.
when's the next ZBA board meeting?
The 18th.
September 18th.
September 18th? You can definitely put them on agenda item number 1 for the 18th. We will have the part 2 and part 3 completed before that meeting. We will have a resolution prepared that will have the seeker assessment as part of it. I think, Amber, correct me if I'm wrong, this is your standard resolution. We'll just take this and plug in the seeker part of that. And then on the 18th, the board can consider the part 2, the board members can consider the part 2 and part 3, deliberate upon it, and then consider the resolution for a vote.
Okay, so I think to let the applicant and council know on whether or not we would have been prepared to make a vote, or whether you prefer to send it back up to the county to remove the supermajority piece. So, Fred, are you comfortable then, this would be, we're looking at the number of employees, the showroom as it exists, we don't know what to call it, and the size of the building and its use? I think those are the modifications that are before us.
Yes,
I can't completely committed, but you're comfortable as, in the facts we've heard so far?
yes.
Okay. Matt? Yep. Alexis?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. All right. Leah?
Yes.
You're comfortable. I'm comfortable at this point, all right? And this is holding on to I'll take a look at what seeker is. But so with that in mind, are you comfortable then with proceeding forward or sending it off to the county? Because if you do send it off to the county, you're not going to get back here until
Till the 18th, I thought.
November 6th.
So you wouldn't be on the county meeting until October 11th because we've missed the September deadline at this point. So you'd be on the October 11th meeting for the county. We go back down to one meeting a month, so you wouldn't be back before us until November 6th.
So even, I would even suggest, even if you wanted to, talk to your clients tonight, and I think if you let us know by tomorrow, if we could do that, on which way you want to go, just let Amber know.
I think based on the smiles and nods I'm getting from these two that you'd like to proceed? I think based on what you've just told us and the information presented, perhaps I can suggest we leave the public hearing open in case there are any other questions. That gives us an opportunity to submit anything else that any of the board members need or council might need in terms of making that final determination, and then we can proceed to a vote on the 18th.
That sounds fine.
So, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. The public hearing has remained open?
Yes.
That's all we do is public hearing.
Anyone from the public want to speak for or against the application?
You'll close the public hearing on the 18th before you proceed, correct?
Yes, that's what I was suggesting, yes.
Yes, I think all the other, I don't know how many times, it was the applicant who had asked for it to be tabled to sort things out with council. All right, we're all good? Everyone's good? Questions, comments, concerns?
One concern. On the 18th?
Yep.
Are we talking about tabling to the 18th now?
Yes.
Okay. We have, our daughter's wedding is on the 16th, and we have tons of people in town. So the 18th is going to be a stressful.
The meeting after that's October 2nd.
Yeah, that's why I suggested leaving the public hearing open in case there are any additional questions that we can answer ahead of time, and then that way to alleviate the stress on the Baileys, I can appear on the 18th.
But it sounds like your applicant's not going to be here on the 18th. So are you sure,
Can we just,
counsel, you sure you don't want them to close the public hearing tonight? If they're willing to do so?
I guess to that end, if there's any other questions or information that any of the board members might like, if they could let us know, and if there's not, then I don't have a problem closing the
But
public
just
hearing
because the
tonight.
public hearing's closed doesn't mean it forgoes them from asking additional questions.
That's fine.
And by the looks of tonight, it doesn't appear
I don't think
there's been a
we're,
lot of active public engagement.
no, on that basis, I'm fine closing the public hearing this evening.
And that's what we'll do. We're comfortable with that? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Sounds like a plan.
And maybe someday this application will go away.
it's been since April.
Now, that's why they brought me in from the bullpen.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for your time. Supervisor Kohovic, anything for us?
Don't put that on me.
No? All right, how about board member,
Hometown Days on Saturday, and that's a presentation on
Can you send me
Stuart Farms of Victor, right here
Very
in
good.
School 45.
good. Adam, you good, Adam? We're all set? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Thanks so much. Good night, thanks for your patience.